evening, everybody. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 93, and we're talking about respect and common courtesy in the woods. Um, so what does that mean necessarily, Ben? This was kind of your brainchild. So what does that mean to you, and what does that mean in the topic of tonight?
Well, I guess it means a lot of things, but one of the things for sure is just how we treat others and how we treat the actual environment we're in. And I think this is important because I'm seeing more and more posts of people seeing things that are upsetting them in the woods or getting upset with just the general way of things are happening. And I know people don't mean to do things to upset people, but there is certain levels of respect and common courtesy that if we all follow, it's going to make everyone's lives, I think, a little bit better, a little bit more enjoyable. So one of the ones that I've seen recently is people not following the basically leave no sign, leave no trace uh, um, respect. So people who go in and leave things more or less permanent, build a lot of permanent campgrounds and stuff. And the problem I see with this particular activity, although I can understand why people do it, is the more marks we leave in the woods, the more damage we do, the trees we cut down, the campsites we leave, the the structures that we could leave, or even fire rings, the more stuff we do like that, the more visible it is, the more people kind of get upset. They put complaints in, and it's only a matter of time before they restrict those areas, and all of a sudden we can't use them at all because people are using them. So I want to talk a lot about that, I guess. And the other thing is how we treat each other when we come across each other. Not that I'm hearing a lot of complaints on that particular thing, but I do think it warrants some talking about how do you treat others when you see them, because it's not always clear cut, and sometimes we can easily overstep our bounds. So does that explain it well?
No, 100%. And we're definitely on the same wavelength here. And I guess my big gripe on this whole topic is it's really easy to kind of be courteous and stuff like that. So it's almost mind-boggling why it doesn't happen more often, or why there's, especially with the leave no trace thing. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not 100% advocate of it. I am guilty for leaving the odd fire ring around there, as you've seen with the waterfall, but that's
Yeah.
kind of a common shared campsite. It was established before I got there, and all I did was maintain it.
Yes.
And that's not unacceptable to me if it's something like that. But I believe when you and I went camping on the side of the lake, we cleared that whole place out.
Yeah.
And it didn't take any more time than our normal pack up.
No. No, we made a point of because we knew that this was a spot that we were basically borrowing. We knew that this land was most likely owned by someone. That if we didn't show the respect, the next thing you know, you'd be all kinds of signs, no trespassing, all that. So if you go in, do your little thing, and then leave, and people never know you're there, no one's going to complain. No one's going to give you a hard time. But and I do understand, like a lot of us don't have access to property that we can do what we want in, and a lot of us have the want to have like a little spot we can go to and be more or less set up and ready to go. And I understand this. I don't want to make people feel bad who want this, because I understand that not everyone can afford to buy 5 or 10 acres of land that they can go out and use. But when you do go in and you build, say, a permanent lean-to and a permanent fireplace and some walls and all this stuff, that although it looks cool to you and you go back to it and you're really enjoying it, and in many ways, what are you really hurting? Uh, you are hurting our whole sport. And I am going to refer to this as a sport. You hurt the sport because others will see this and then complain. Even though the true damage is very minimal potentially, it does leave an image that people can use and kind of hold up against us. So it's something I think we need to talk a little bit about. Um, and you brought up another good point. There are existing campsites, and keeping those existing campsites neat and tidy and few and far between, I don't think is a big problem. I think that if there's the occasional one where there's everything is neat and tidy and kept clean, there's no garbage left around, the fire rings are kept clean, there's not a lot of ash, there's no garbage half burned in it. Me and Jeremy and Gary went camping one time in Cloud Lake Wilderness area, And when we pulled up to a the common campground that a lot of people use, the 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 fire pit was so buried in garbage you couldn't see it. And it was Tim Hortons cups and tin cans and beer cans and some kind of old doll. Like it was ridiculous. And I don't know if I'd ever seen another bushcrafter so upset as these two fellows were when I was standing there. Like they were truly angry. They were angry because we came in here to enjoy ourselves, and now we're cleaning up someone else's filth and garbage. And there's nothing pleasant about that. And we did that because we respect that environment. And me and you did the same. Coming out, we took out more garbage than we brought in.
Yeah, we picked up a couple things on our way in and out. We picked up
Yeah,
things on our way in, knowing that we wouldn't be able to get them on the way out, and we just
yeah,
kept them with us to take out when we left.
yeah. And I think that's important. I mean, that's the big messages, and it's just some basic rules. There's not a lot to this. Leave any area you come to in better shape than when you got there. If you always did that, if everyone who went in the woods followed that simple concept, the world would be a much better place. Like that's a very simple thing. If everyone took a little bit, left where they go a little bit better than when they found it, then the world would stay clean and neat and tidy, and the damage and the respect would be very obvious. And I think there are places like that, and there's plenty of places around here that aren't. Uh, I know growing up, the Vienna sausage cans and beer cans can be found almost anywhere. It's here I
Bean
see the
cans and beer cans.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the ones I really want to talk about is when you go to a place, do leave it in better shape than when you found it. Try to keep your campsites that are existing few and far between. Keep them neat and tidy. Those are some pretty basic rules. I think that we could all definitely deal with. Um, do you have anything to add to that,
The
Robert?
only thing I had to add to this, and it was kind of formulating in my head as you were chatting there, is I do have a little bit of a story that people have to realize. There's actually potentially legal repercussions that can happen by setting up semi-permanent or permanent campsites in Nova Scotia. If you do this on Crown land, which is very common, people go out and camp on Crown land and stuff like that. If you set up a permanent or semi-permanent structure, you could potentially be charged um, for doing so. And my story is when I was younger, 16, funny enough, we were talking about this before it came on around that age time.
Yeah,
Me and the folks I hung around with, we built a camp, and we thought it was actually on one of the guys' grandmother's land, and it turned out to be like 30 feet past it or something like that. It was a ridiculously small amount, but anyway, it was technically
yeah,
on Crown land. We built this camp, and truth be told, as most 16-year-olds, it was just kind of a hangout. We went there to do stuff we weren't supposed to do and just hang out and get away from adults, right?
yeah,
But it was harmless enough. Honestly, it was fairly well built. It wasn't ragtag together. Like, it didn't look terrible. We had plywood. It was a fairly good structure built in with some. It started off as kind of a triangular treehouse, if I remember correctly, using logs and stuff, and then it just kind of went from there. The more we got into it, the more we actually invested into it. It was a fairly decent structure when it was all said and done. Now,
yeah,
it had been standing for a couple months, I think. And one time we were all headed down with our stuff, and we see this big yellow notice stuck to it. And literally, it's from Department of Natural Resources at the time. You have X amount of days to vacate and remove this structure, or legal action will be taken, and basically they were going to burn it down. And we had no idea about that at the time. Once again, 16, 17, maybe the oldest of us, 18-year-old kids, we had no idea about this stuff. We were from the generation where you went out and you built stuff in the woods and things was great. But now nowadays it's even more strict, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like, it doesn't take long before these things pop up. So if you're making these semi-private structures, semi-permanent, permanent structures, bug out areas is a big one that's happening right now. Like the prepper movement is it's more prominent now than it was in the past. So you see a lot more of these like bug out locations and stuff. And anybody that's out there listening, especially in Nova Scotia, I can't speak specifically for anywhere else, but for Nova Scotia for sure, If you're building that on Crown land, you don't have any permits, no leasing or anything like that, which the government doesn't do anymore, you could potentially be held liable financially, and a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into that. So not only is it disrespectful to the land because you're damaging it, putting up these permanent, semi-permanent structures if you don't own the land, um, potentially you could get fined. And in extreme cases, I have heard of people doing small stints of jail time. But I mean, I think there's more to the story. But I mean, it's possible. You know what I mean? If you look up the act, I can't remember what it is right off the top of my head. Uh, I think it's like up to a couple $1,000s worth of fines and 30 days in jail or something like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, that's very true, and in some ways, I actually do think it is a little unfortunate that people who do want to practice these skills and do want the opportunity to build these things, it is unfortunate that the opportunities are much harder than they were in previous generations. I'm not going to lie. The cabin I grew up with my parents, they never purchased land or property. We just went in the woods, found a spot, we built a cabin there. And it was years and years later that someone actually showed up and said, "Well, you didn't technically own any rights to do that. Could you pay us $25 a year?" And at the time, I think everyone, because there was a bunch of us that did this, everyone who was in this basically said like no. And I think it took 2 or 3 years before any of them started paying it, but they did eventually force them to pay it. But it was like pittance to what it is now. Like it is harder, it is more difficult, and I'm not going to lie and say that I think it isn't, but it is just a reality of life right now. Uh,
Well, just to add on to that, once again, I only know about Nova Scotia because I did work for Natural Resources. They used to do a thing called campsite leases, and it was
yeah,
exactly for
yeah,
situations which you described. People years ago had built camps and stuff like that. It was on Crown land. Nobody stopped them at the time. Crown swooped in, wanted to get compensation for that. And don't get me wrong, some of these campsite leases for a couple bucks a month. Some of them were for a couple dollars a year, but you had to pay them. And the second you failed to do so, the province would come in and reclaim the land, and they were inspected yearly, and they had to meet certain standards and codes. And the second they did it, once again, it was basically a loophole that they allowed people to fit through, but they kept narrowing it, narrowing it, narrowing it to the point where, unless your cabin was basically perfect standard, which once again I can't complain about that because they just want to ensure that it's not going to create damage in the woods, catch on fire or whatever, right?
yeah.
That your camps are getting weeded out. So Steve McDonald, in the comments here, just to point out what he was saying, he said, erecting any sort of structure on someone's land can cause concerns about adverse possession, commonly known as squatters' rights. Well, you can't claim adverse possession against federal or provincial territory, your town, city, or private land, or your town or city. For a private landowner, this can be a legitimate concern, not your land. Do not build, pretty simple. And that's kind of the good point. If it's not your land, even if it's crown land, you shouldn't be erecting any kind of permanent or semi-permanent structure. This even goes for hunting season. Technically, like anything more than a pop-up blind is considered a semi-permanent or permanent structure, depending on how well it's built,
Yeah.
and that meets all the requirements to technically cause issues if they want to come in and do such. You know what I mean? And it all comes down to this common courtesy. You don't own the land, so why would you go in and do something like that? It's pretty simple to ask, or even to look on Kijiji. Kijiji is a great place. I've done this. I've literally put out ads, looking for piece of property to do some bushcrafting. You know what I mean? And you meet some interesting people, and you can have some pretty good times doing that. I've put on a few little mild survival courses with literally putting out ads on Kijiji, just saying like, look, I'm wanting to go in the deep woods and camp. I'm not going to hurt anything. I'm just literally looking for a place to pitch tent and teach some basic skills.
Yeah.
I don't mind compensating to some degree because at the time I was charging for the course, but it was pretty easy to figure that out. I even had offers like, oh yeah, you can use the land wherever you want. You can put deer blinds, blah, 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 blah. Like, people are pretty generous if you're straight up and honest with them. And especially
Yeah.
if you have a spot picked out and you're like, oh, this is a beautiful spot, just go online. Viewpoint, great system. You can go on, find out who owns the property, and just give them a call and be like, hey, look, this is a beautiful spot. Do you mind if I camp there for a few nights? They know you're there. You're technically no longer trespassing. And honestly, if they do say, like, oh, absolutely not, well, then you know the kind of people that's going to be there. And did you really want to get caught in a situation where you were on their property and they decided to find you there?
Yeah. No, it is true. Very true. and I think it's a good point. I'm kind of glad we kind of got that out. Um, and we could talk about this quite a bit more. I don't think we need to, though. Um, I, like I said, I do understand why people are doing this. I do understand the prepper thing. I do understand building the skills. I do agree 100%. If you ask, most likely someone will offer up a piece of land.
Mm.
In fact, I've actually had 4 or 5 people tell me they're planning on clearing a piece of land for something anyways. And if I wanted to go in and use it in the meantime, go ahead. I have like 2 to 3 years where I can use it. And then when they clear it, basically clear out myself. I haven't really taken anyone up on that because I am into a much more like leave no trace anyways. Building something semi-permanent isn't what I need right now. Uh, but I just wanted to mention that to people that are thinking about it. I do understand, but out of respect for the sport, you probably should not do that. The other one that I kind of wanted to bring up, and there may be some more that you want to bring up, Robert, was just common courtesy others when you see them out there. And this is a really interesting one because you have to be somewhat cognizant of how people react when you see them. Some people you meet in the woods, you can say hi, they'll usually say hi back. And after that cue, it's really going to tell you if you can continue talking to these people or not. Some people will basically say hi and they'll immediately walk away. Obviously, these people don't want to talk to you. Other people will ask you what you're up to, get very interested, and you can have a good chat with them. I personally like that. I like having a chat with people when I meet them in the woods. I consider myself fairly personable that way. But I do meet a lot of people where it's like in parks, in private land, everything. Where some of them, they're out there to enjoy the serenity and being by themselves and being away from people, and they have no interest in talking to anyone. It's not that they're mean or hateful people. It's just that they want that time to themselves. Other people do like to enjoy, they're out there to enjoy nature, but they also like to talk to people who are into it, see what they can learn. You just have to be aware, I think, of when you meet people. I think it's always good to be friendly. I think you should always say hi to people, but very much follow the cues after that. And if they don't really want to talk to you, just kind of step back. Now, in the meantime, I've heard some really weird stories. Like I heard people have someone come up to them and say, "Do you mind if I camp on your campsite? I don't want to. My campsite's 2 or 3 further back. I don't want to go there. It's just too far. Do you mind if we stay here?" And these people are like, "Sure." And then these other people set up a tent on their property, or like their campsite that they paid for, and didn't even speak to them for the rest of the time they were there. And I was like, "That's kind of weird."
That's a little odd.
Right? Like if you've asked to stay on my campsite, you're now basically I will most likely say yes, but I expect you're going to provide some kind of entertainment for the
Well,
rest
yeah,
of
I
them.
mean that's kind of, I don't know, maybe to me that's kind of like the unspoken code. If you're encroaching, because to me that's encroaching,
Yeah.
there's got to be some sort of compensation there, at least on an entertainment value. You have to sit around the fire and shoot the breeze. There's got to be a good story involved anyway. So why don't you want to walk 3 spots back? Like,
Yeah. No, agreed 100%. And I mean, I wouldn't like if I was set up on a campsite with somebody, I expect we're going to have a conversation and I expect we're going to laugh and carry on. And I don't, if you're going to set up on my campsite and not talk to me, you might want to walk to the next
I was gonna say
campsite.
that's just borderline creepy in my mind. Like somebody just sitting up to the corner of your campsite, slurping their tea, staring you down. Like that's a little weird. But to be
Yeah.
fair, I have been on the other side of this as well, where I've been kind of the weird guy in the woods. And okay, we're gonna dive into the slightly PG side of our topic for tonight. Once again, the famous waterfalls that you hear me bring up multiple times. I was sitting potentially down by the fire pit, maybe completely nude.
Maybe, but
Maybe.
surely.
Maybe I had just gotten out of the water. It was just Melissa and I. We were off on vacation, out in the middle of nowhere, wasn't expecting anybody. And what do we have? A group of people arrive at the top of the waterfalls. So I was the creepy guy at the bottom. There's a naked guy in the woods. And I'm kind of like, give me a sec. I'll put some clothes on. I swear I'm not usually like this. And by the time, I scurried away and got dressed and came back, they had buggered off. So I still don't know to this day how they made out after that, but I can tell you one thing. They did not come to the bottom of the waterfall to the campsite, which I was kind of expecting because it's the only thing in there. You know that yourself. I thought they were coming
Yeah.
into the campsite. Mel and I were bugging out that day anyway. I thought they were coming in, so I was like, "Oh crap, you caught me." Literally, my pants down. I'll just, sorry, but I'll rectify this. You guys have the site. I got dressed, came out, they were gone. I asked Melissa where they went. She was like, they literally just kind of looked down, shot some weird glances, did a 360, or sorry, a 180, and bombed straight out. So yeah, I can kind of see the other side of that coin too. But on the flip side of that, if you do happen to catch somebody in an awkward situation like that, realize, at least from the creepy guy's standpoint, sometimes they just were legitimately not expecting that. Um, I mean, for
I
me, I literally just gotten out of the water. Just the two of us there. I wanted to bathe. We had been there 3 days. I literally took a bar of soap, stripped down, jumped in the water, and I was washing. You know what I mean? And then I came out, and I was literally sitting down to dry myself off and have a cup of tea. And I stroll out. I'm like, well, this is awkward. You know what I mean? You try not to make a big deal of it, but you just kind of be like, oh, okay. And you quickly cover up and you do your thing. But anyway, if it happens, it happens. Like sometimes you catch people in awkward moments. Just kind of give them time to recover from it and then go on as normal, honestly. Unless it's really sketchy, like, they're waving around shotguns or something. But maybe there's a completely perfect rational explanation to that, too. Once again, as Ben said, take the cues. You know what I mean? Like, it was obviously me and my wife. Uh, we had a pretty good setup. We weren't sketchy, you know what I mean? Or at least I didn't think we were sketchy. Maybe to them we were, but it was just one of those things. So,
Maybe they were going back hoping to find something, and they found it, and they're like, "Oh, we got what we wanted."
that's that. Maybe they were just looking for a story and they got it. You know what I mean? Like this one time we went out to the woods and we found a naked guy at the bottom of the waterfalls, and all their friends were like, "No, you didn't." Yeah. You go to this waterfall. There's a naked guy at the bottom of it. Swear it's a legend. Anyway, so maybe I'm a legend now. I have no idea.
Oh, I'm sure we all have a naked
Anyway, so
friend.
the moral of the story is I have seen it from the other side of the coin, and sometimes you just kind of got to move past the awkwardness. You know what I mean? It happens. It happens in everyday life, and sometimes it's just nothing can be done.
No,
So
uh, true that. I think that's one of the big ones for me though. Is when you do meet somebody in the woods, it is
oh, you just glossed over that and moved on. Yeah,
yeah.
all right, great, Rob. Now that we're going to ignore that, move on.
Listen, we've all been naked in the woods. I'm sure everyone's
It
had
happens.
a story. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. I'd rather be outside. I can contest. Ben is not quiet in the woods.
Not quite. Who?
Hey, Zach, how's it going, bud? Just saying hi to a couple other people popping. Anyway, yeah, sorry. I kind of divulged on the story, but like I said, the main point of it was just to show from the other side of it. Sometimes people are just awkward because he caught them in an awkward spot. Give them a chance, and then if they, don't pressure them or hound them, but once again, follow the cues, like Ben said. Obviously, my spot was just like, oh crap, you caught me, and I scurried off to get dressed. But Mel didn't, run away. She kind of waved, and they buggered off. So.
Yeah. I guess this does need to be thrown out there. If someone says I'm going down the river to get cleaned up, and you don't want to see them, you should probably not go down to the river behind them. That's a good piece of advice in general.
I can't argue that one either. But to be fair, these people did not have the benefit of me saying I was going to
No,
go get cleaned up. So.
no, but I have been at the creepy end of that one where I said to everyone in camp, I'm going down to get cleaned up, and a few minutes later, somebody else from camp comes walking down the trail to where they knew I was going, and I think they got a surprise, and you watched them turn around and head back to camp. I was like, man, I told you what I was doing. I was pretty open about this.
No pun intended, but anyway, we kind of went off the rails there. But yeah, no, totally, it happens. Um, Unless you wanted to reminisce a little bit more, I did want to kind of loop back into the leave no trace thing. Unless you had more to say on courtesy.
No, go ahead.
So we've kind of talked about this leave no trace thing, but why don't we start from square one on this leave no trace? I kind of had it on the back of my head. Why don't we kind of explain what leave no trace pretty much means in the broadest sense of the term. I mean, I guess the broadest sense of the term is literally leave no trace, make it like you weren't there. But there's things you can do that will make that easier for you, and there's ways you can go about it that make it a little nicer. We're not talking about put every little exact needle back where it belongs and things like that. But for me, the big one is take your garbage. Don't leave garbage. Don't. It shouldn't be obvious that people had stayed there for any amount of time after a few days. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Take all your garbage. Don't cut down a whole bunch of trees. Try to only, harvest fallen dead wood if you can. If you
And that
do
kind
have,
of helps because you're cleaning up, right? It's
yeah,
perfectly acceptable to clean up dead down trees to, firewood and whatever else you want to do. It's cleaning up, it's getting rid of litter that's in the bottom of the forest. If there ever was a forest fire or something like that, you're actually removing some of the fuel. It is a good thing.
um, I have personally, I have cut saplings and stuff down to use for cooking, or to just allow me to set up a tent or tarp because it's in the way. I try to keep that to an absolute minimum when I do. Like, you do minimize what you have to disturb, and anything you can, you put back the way it was. I mean, obviously, if you cut the tree down, you can't reattach it, you can't grow it back. That's too advanced for any of us, anyways.
I carry
It,
wood glue, thank you very much.
I graft trees back together all the time. I have wood glue and wax.
Hey,
The average is not doing that. But no, those are little things. We don't go in and clear areas. And if you do ever set up a camp, because I have places where I go back, there wasn't really a camp there before, and I leave it pretty natural. But now I know there's enough clearing that I can set up stuff. Uh, there's no harm in reusing those places. Or when you discover one that someone else is using, reuse it. Like I said, though, keep it clean, keep it neat. Uh, there are plenty of great places in the woods to camp. You rarely have to clear a new spot to set up a camp for the night. You usually don't have to go too much further one way or the other to find an adequate place that you can set up the average tent or hammock, especially a hammock, perfectly fine without having to limb a whole bunch of trees or deforest any amount of area. So just keep that in mind. Even with tents, you're cutting down a tree, you still got a root there, it's still in the way. Take a few minutes, find a clearing that will work. Usually it's pretty doable. If you can't, I would hazard to guess your tent is too big for what we are doing, and you should stay in the campgrounds.
Switch to hammocks.
Switch to hammocks.
One of the main reasons I actually switched to hammocks, not saying tents are bad, don't misunderstand, but one of the big reasons for me was it was more efficient for the leave no trace.
Oh man. And here's one that a lot of people don't get, and it bugs me all the time, is not using tree straps, like proper wide band tree straps. If you're just running a 1/4 inch line around a tree, you're definitely leaving a trace that will be noticeable 6 months to a year later, because that tree is most likely going to either be very ill or very dead in a year because you're strangling it. You hang a 200 plus pound man around a 6 inch, round tree with that thin rope. It's going to destroy that outer layer, the layer where the moisture actually travels up and down the tree. The nutrients are moved, and it will die. You will kill a tree that way. But go ahead.
No, I was going to say prime example. Before I had my tree straps, the ropes I was using to hold up my hammock.
Yeah.
When we were down there this year, you can still see the impressions from where the ropes were because I am Ben is being very generous at 200 plus pound person, more closer to 300 pound if we're being honest. But anyway, I'm a heavier individual. I think that was half-inch rope. Might not have been half-inch, maybe 3/8. Anyway, it was a fairly good size rope, but it actually, from the 2 days we stayed there, made an indent on the tree. One tree, the other one was hardwood. It wasn't so bad. I guess that's worth mentioning too. If you are going to hang a hammock and you have a choice between hardwood and softwoods, hardwoods are harder to damage because naturally they're a more denser wood, pound for pound when it comes to softwood. Anyway, Yeah, that softwood on the tail end that I had used actually still has the ring marks there. If you go in and you look, you can see exactly where the rope was. Tree is doing okay now, but
Yeah,
it has that like ripple effect in there from where it was around two times.
yeah. Um, so yeah, little things like that. It's a tiny bit of extra weight to carry a tree strap. It's not a big deal. Um, Ideally, I think they're supposed to be closer to 2 inch. I think mine are like 1 1/4, 1.5. It's still better than nothing.
Yeah, I think mine's
Uh,
1.5 now too, and I haven't had any problems with that.
no, but yeah, definitely get yourself a decent tree strap and you use that. Try not to put undue stress on any single thing in the woods, and it tends to be a lot better. We've talked before about different ways to make fires so that they're basically leave no trace. I don't know if we need to go too much.
Nope, you're good, Ben. I think the daughter is gonna burst in here on me in a second. That's all.
She likes seeing herself on the video. Eh?
She does. She'll actually stand here, talk to us for a few minutes, and then beeline it to her bedroom because she's supposed to be in bed, and she probably has us tuned in there right now.
Awesome. Yeah. So, yeah. What else is there to leave no trace that might be worth saying?
What was I going to say? Oh, a little bit on fire pits. Um, it is actually worth cleaning up your fire pit. You're not going to get rid of, well, if you did it right, I guess not right, but a good way of going about it is if you're in an area where you can maybe remove the top layer of soil, uh, like mossy areas is good where you can kind of cut the area out. You can pick that whole thing up, move it away from your fire pit a little bit so it doesn't dry out. Maybe keep it moist, something like that. And then when you're all done, you take all your ashes, you clean them up and stuff like that. And there's ways to get rid of ashes.
Oh yeah.
And you can literally clean everything up and drop the piece right back on. It'll be a little nitrogen rich. It'll get a little brown, but then within a couple weeks, it'll be right back like nothing was there. And I mean, it's a couple extra minutes to burn and what not to for those that don't realize that beer cans don't burn. Actually, beer cans do burn if you get your fire hot enough. Everything burns. It's just it's how much heat does it take to burn it.
Yeah. I have definitely burned beer cans and cleaned through it later and found absolutely no visible trace.
But you have to have a
Uh,
pretty hot fire, in
but you
all
have to have a
honesty.
pretty darn good fire. Um, and obviously, if you don't, sometimes the thin edges will go, but you'll still end up with the tops and bottoms because they're thicker. But yeah, if you get a fire good enough, the one at my cabin, I've made quite a few beer cans disappear that way. But generally, I try to drag it out. It's worth recycling. Like I'm not encouraging anyone to burn cans, but sometimes it happens.
No, not at all. And like Steve said, he said not based on what he sees. Now, what the common thing that happens is, um, people are just in there for a day trip. They have a
Yeah,
small fire going, maybe to cook lunch, something like that. Maybe brought a few wobbly pops in. Maybe when they shouldn't really be because they're on ATVs or something like that. And instead of trying to take that evidence out with them, they just toss the cans in the burn pit. And they
yeah,
might scorch a side of them, or you might get a hole with them, but the hole with them's still there. And honestly, that's kind of the problem. Is even if you are doing something like that, and I don't condone it in any way, and neither and Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures does not condone the actions of drinking and driving in any way, shape, or form. I'd like to say that first and foremost. But it's still better to bring that garbage back out with you after you've waited the proper amount of time so that you're sober enough to drive. Um, yeah, just take your garbage. I mean, take a Sobeys. Well, I guess you can't get Sobeys bags now, but take a bag. Get
yeah,
go to the dollar store, get a dry bag for $4. Man, that thing holds a ton of stuff and it's tough as nails.
yeah. Um, I've always said, I think most people have heard someone say this anyways, is you were strong enough to drag it in. You had enough room to drag it in. I find it hard to believe you didn't have room to drag it out. Like generally when you come in, those cans were full. They weighed a lot more than they do empty. You can just step on them, crush them down to make them less. Um, the wrappers for your meat containers and stuff, the styrofoam, all that stuff doesn't weigh that much. It can be packed down, but you still see it. You still see fire pits in the middle of the woods just overflow with old, styrofoam containers and beer cans. And I mean, like I said, we've seen stuffed animals and
And
kids' toys
this
and
is what
all
I
kinds
want
of
to know.
things.
What are they expecting for the next people coming in? Are they expecting them to burn that stuff? Because if you do, you can no longer eat off that fire for a long time. Like,
Well,
that's the thing with styrofoam and stuff like that. You don't really want to be burning that stuff, although I know we're all guilty of it. I've been guilty of it. Everybody's been guilty of it, but as time has moved on, I try to do it less and less and less and less. If it's plastic or toxic, I try not to burn it. You know what I mean? Um, but if you do burn it, you've now made your fire basically so you can't really eat off those flames because of the chemicals and stuff that are in there. So if you want to roast a hot dog, it's going to be a funky tasting hot dog, possibly
yeah,
carcinogenic.
yeah. No, agreed 100%. You know, it's
Well, when we cooked those steaks on the open fire, imagine flopping that down on a big greasy spot of melted styrofoam or something. You know what I mean?
100%. And since you brought it up, and I know like you're an avid ATVer, and I used to be. I don't have one now. Sticking to existing trails is another common courtesy. Like, don't go trailblazing new trails everywhere you go and tearing up more and more ground and stuff. Like, you can see when someone drives across a bog or a clearing and they took a different path because it tears up the ground and it's very visible and it's very unpleasing to anyone who's not doing it. Uh,
And that's where we get a lot of our bad rap, not only as bushcrafters, but ATVers especially. People trailblazing, man, ATV trails do a ton of damage. That's why it's worth just maintaining and using the existing trails. You can still go out and have a ton of fun, but blazing trails, man, it can do a ton of damage.
yeah. And I mean, there are times new trails are required to get to a certain location or something. But if that needs to be done, like I think there's probably a process. Most places there are a process to add a new trail. And probably if there is a way to do that, follow that. If you're going towards say a camp you have existing that you've been using, like if you own land, you're building a road, make sure it's one road, mark it properly, keep using the same road in and out. Don't make multiple ways. Don't just find multiple ways in and out to it because next thing you know, somebody flying overhead or coming along later just sees this maze work of people's tracks and it just looks bad, and that's where you get the complaints. That's you get D&D having to come in and look into what's going on. Those guys don't want to be in there harassing you any more than you want to be harassed, but now they got to because there's been people complaining. I feel bad for both people in that situation, but the best way to avoid it is stick to existing trails. Don't make any more damage than you need because they do. ATVs can be fairly unobtrusive to the land in general, but the reality is there's a lot of land that's very sensitive, especially moss and bogs and stuff, and driving over it leaves a lasting mark that can be seen in many cases for years to come.
No, 100% true. A lot of people don't understand moss itself, especially the fungus and stuff that grows in moss. It's quite the network that runs under, under the moss and stuff like that, and interconnects a lot of the ecology out there in the woods. Like, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on it. I only know the bare scratched surface amount of it, but it's a real interesting topic for anybody that really wants to read some dry literature. It is a little dry, but it is super interesting.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and something else I'd like to bring notice to, Ben, and maybe you want to touch on this too, is obey the fire laws when you're out there. Trying to
Oh, yeah.
sneak a fire and stuff like that, like, yeah, you might get away with it, but you could also set a forest fire. I don't know how many times when I was working for Natural Resources, and I think I worked for them 7 or 8 seasons. I can't, maybe it was longer than that. Oh, crap, I was there for 10 seasons. So I worked for Natural Resources for 10 seasons as a wildland firefighter, and I can't remember how many times I was called to people that were burning, just having a campfire.
Yeah.
During times when they shouldn't, and it got away from them is the worst part. Not just having a campfire, that's a whole other kettle of fish, and there's tons of those, but people that had a campfire that got away from them when there was burn restrictions on. There's
Yeah.
a reason there's burn restrictions. Does it suck? Yes. I understand the need to want to get out there and have a fire. It's comfort, it's stuff like that. I get it. But is it really worth burning down the woods around you, potentially hurting yourself? You know what I mean?
Oh, it isn't, and I guarantee anyone who's accidentally started a forest fire, and I haven't, thank God, but anyone who has will tell you, because I spoke to a few of them, and I'm sure you have too. They feel so bad. It really does not. It doesn't just ruin the trip. It ruins a lot more than that, because there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of knowledge of, the inconveniences you put through, the damage you did, the damage you could have caused, the fact that you could even cause the loss of life, uh, both human and otherwise. So the best thing to do is really, really be careful when it comes to having a fire in general. I think a lot of us definitely err on the side of making too big of a fire. Uh, Believe it or not, you don't need a huge fire for cooking or for warmth.
No, not at all. And Steve asks, can you use a propane or butane burner during a fire ban, not expecting legal advice? And of course, we're not going to give legal advice. We're not lawyers. However, it's all in the wording. Is all I will say about this. Um, Depends on your situation, what it's going to be considered. It depends on who investigates you, and depends on what you're doing with it. But usually, propane burners that have some sort of enclosing device, so we're talking like camp stoves and things like that, are okay because they fall under a barbecue act basically. They're a means of cooking, it's an enclosed device, it's self contained. Technically, it's not supposed to allow any kind of sparks to escape because it's either gas powered or it has some sort of spark arrestor. Um, and it's self enclosed. Now, when you get into like open flame things that could be tipped over, like the little butane stove I carry, gray area alcohol stoves, definitely not because they're not in any way, shape, or form contained. Basically, if you accidentally tip it over, you have an open alcohol fire going. And I think one of the other requirements was it may have to have like an emergency shut off device if it tips over. A lot of propane things will have that. If it falls over, there's an automatic shut off and stuff in it. It's definitely worth looking up your local bylaws and stuff on that, because it is kind of a gray area. It depends on a lot of things. But generally during fire bans, I'm trying to think of this. A lot of times, parks, for instance, won't have to adhere to the fire ban because their fire pits are enclosed, they're raised, and they have spark arresters. So, once again, all I can say is check your local bylaws and use your best judgment. And if, when in doubt, if you got to get your fire fix on, go to a camping park. Chances are they're not shut down.
Yeah.
Sucks you got to put out a little bit of coin, but you can have your fire and not get charged for it.
Um, for sure. I always think a bit of safety when you're having anything that's you're lighting a flame. You have something that could start a fire. Definitely think some safety. You mentioned clearing the ground underneath, or just setting up on rock. Sometimes I've even, like with the alcohol stoves, take a sheet of tin foil or a small piece of steel or something like a pie pan and put it in there. So if there is spillage or wastage, it's contained. I know that aluminum won't take intense heat for any length of time, but it generally will prevent an alcohol fire from spreading. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't weigh much, and it definitely gives you a peace of mind. We've talked about fire bowls in the past where you can really contain the fire. Yes, that doesn't prevent sparks and stuff from going up. And that's the big fear with a lot of fires, is not the fire you have and that you're controlling and watching, but anything's coming out of it and starts a fire somewhere else. And it doesn't take long. Like one of those embers hits somewhere and just smolders. It could smolder for minutes, hours, days if it lands in the right environment. And you're very much going to be suffering when it does come up. And just picture like just your own risk. You're set up for the night and your embers go out and they start a fire 100 feet away or 150 feet away. You go to sleep. When you wake up, everything around you could be engulfed in flames. Uh,
And I've seen situations like that.
yeah.
We've
So,
had to pull people out. Not life threatening risk, but not far from it. I mean, all big fires start small. Just keep that in mind. Just because it's a small fire doesn't mean it doesn't have the potential to get real big, real dangerous, real fast.
um, Here's another one. I'm sure we're all a little guilty of it. Definitely making sure your fire is 100% out.
Mm.
And that means sometimes you do have to cart water a distance. You have to find some way to truly smother it. I've seen fires that I was 100% were out, and come back 2-3 hours later, and it's a flame again, or at least heavy smoke. Um, Walking through Keji, I've often come up on campsites with nobody around, with a fire still burning and burning quite well. And I'm like, I bet you they put that fire out, thought they did, and then 2-3 hours later, it, the half burnt pieces of wood that were left in the fire pit ignited again, and they're burning away, and there's nice little smoke coming out of it, and a good little flame, and I could have, roasted a marshmallow or a wiener on there, no problem. And there's no sign other than the fire that anyone's been at the camp for quite a few hours.
And I mean, it's especially worse on warm, dry days. Um, at Natural Resources, we often took our fire weather index around 1 o'clock because
Yeah.
that was kind of your peak time. Between 12 and 7 o'clock is your peak time for burning. That's why a lot of times, if there's a burn restriction on, it may just be between those hours. But what's going to happen at 1 o'clock is going to dictate basically what's going to happen for the rest of the day. Once the sun comes out, wind picks up a tiny bit, usually. You get that sun shining down. It starts drying things out a little bit, gasifying stuff. It's real easy to get spark flip back up. We've gone to forest fires days later that we never declared them out. We declared them contained, and we found spots. Prime example: Porter's Lake fire back in 2012. 16 days in, we were still finding flames.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, yeah. They get into the root systems and stuff too, and they'll pop up like, easily days, weeks. We talked about this with the coal fire that's been running for years.
mm.
But tree roots can do similar. Fire can get down into those, and they smolder, and they'll come up somewhere else, days, weeks, months, years later. So just keep that in mind. Is there any other?
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, if anybody's really interested in the fire science behind this, later on, probably as it gets closer to spring, summer time again, I actually have my fire chief booked in coming on. He's got a ton of experience in the fire service, not only here in Nova Scotia, but in Ontario, where they fight fire a little different. And he's going to educate us a little bit on some of the fire science and a little bit more of the fire side of things. But we're kind of tucking that in our back pocket until it's a tiny bit more relevant. But I've already talked to him. He's agreed to it. He's more than happy to do it. So, and if you're listening, Troy, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, so we've talked about fire. We've talked about, basically your campsites, keeping those clean, neat, tidy, leave no trace type things. We've talked about, meeting other people, be friendly, but show respect to their wishes and privacy while you're in there. I guess the only thing we really haven't talked a lot about is a little about more on the privacy thing and noise levels. Like when you're in there, if there are other people, try to keep it, especially backwoods camping. It's different at a campground. A lot of people go to campgrounds to have a good time, to have parties, to meet other people. That is an intent, in my opinion, in a campground.
Mm-hmm.
In backwoods camping, a lot of people are there to relax and enjoy themselves. And the last thing they want to hear is loud music and you screaming profanities and just being a general poopy head.
Funny enough, on that comment, Steve made a real good point that we kind of breezed over, and we should really talk about.
Okay.
If you go to the bathroom in the woods, be
Yeah.
kind, cover that up, dig or take it out with you. One of the two. You know what I mean? There's a couple ways you can do this. There's the old pack it in, pack it out method where you use baggies, and if you look on, I think it's YouTube. It might even be one of those 5-minute crafts. Shout out to 5-minute crafts. Hope you don't get mad at us for using your name, but they did a thing where they turned a 5-gallon bucket basically into a portable toilet, and it's a great family idea. If you're taking your family out, you just drop a bag in, do your business, tie it up, you're done. If that's the way you want to do it. The other way, a little bit more work intensive. You definitely got to be away from water sources and things like that. Basically, you dig a small outhouse pit, and it has to be so deep, so big. You do your business, then you have to rebury that back in, basically to the point where no smell can escape, preventing animals from basically redigging it back up. And even if you do that, you shouldn't be leaving your toilet paper and stuff like that. Like, yeah, technically it's biodegradable, but at the same time, does a deer or bear that does its business in the woods leave toilet paper? No. So honestly, you really shouldn't either, but that's a personal call.
Yeah, and toilet paper will sit there. I've seen toilet paper at a site that's been there for at least 2 to 3 years and still hasn't fully degraded. So
Exactly.
there are probably toilet papers that degrade faster than others. Some definitely last longer than others, but the reality is it doesn't take that much effort to dig a small hole and and bury it at the very least. But
Once again, no legal advice here. Please use check your your regulations and use your best judgment.
there's certain common sense and different ways you can do it. Just research the ways and find one you're comfortable. Every environment's going to be a bit different. Some environments are going to be more difficult to dig holes and stuff, but there's definitely ways to make sure that it minimizes. And if nothing else, at least get as far away from the trail as possible or where people are most likely going to be. So, if you do have to create an area, get quite a ways away from camp to leave the worst of your mess.
Though I don't think we would ever do a full podcast on this, potentially when the good weather comes around or better weather or whatever, more camp, less COVID. Let's go with that. When less COVID comes around, I'm trying to be political about this. Maybe Ben and I can do a short video on some neat ideas and things like that. Obviously, no drop trowel, but we can talk about some methods and ideas that you can put along there, and we'll just upload it as a normal video. If anybody is interested in such, I don't know if there's a need for that. It kind of seems like it's probably out there, but if somebody is interested and wants to see that, at least myself, I don't know about Ben, but I wouldn't hesitate to do it for anybody that is genuinely interested.
But there is a book out there, How to Shit in the Woods.
Oh yeah, I've seen that actually, and it's from what I hear, it's literally informative. It's not a joke book; it is informative. So.
There is a lot, and a lot of people. If you haven't done it, if that's not something that you're into, I can understand it. Like, it's if you've only ever gone on a toilet and all of a sudden you don't have that toilet, it can cause a lot of confusion for a lot of people. So
I don't mean to laugh. I'm not going to say any names, but I do remember taking somebody to the woods, and they didn't think about that aspect. They're like, they got to go to the bathroom, and threw them the toilet paper. I'm like, go at least 50 feet that way. And they're like, what do you mean? And you could just see that look of panic where the cogs were turning. And the things they wanted to come up weren't coming up.
no, no.
But anyway,
it's a real thing, and some people are so nervous to go away from camp or away from the trail. In fact, there's definitely been search and rescues resulting from that whole episode of people going away from the trail to use the washroom and not finding the trail. So do keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to think, is there anything else we need to talk about? I think we covered quite a bit with this topic, and I mean, I know we could talk on it for quite a bit more, but I think we've covered a lot of the stuff that I would like to cover tonight anyways. Assume there's something in the comments.
Yeah, anybody that wants to know, join us on YouTube, check out this video, and read the comments by Carl. It's true, Carl. I can't argue with you there about that. That's 100% true. It's a different experience. Anyway, yeah, no, we've covered a lot of topics here tonight, and don't get us wrong, we're not here to complain or to nag or whatever you want to call it. It's just honestly, common sense doesn't seem to be so common anymore, just because being out in the woods isn't as common as it used to be historically. You know what I mean? We're getting in a more a more modern, more industrial age where everything kind of happens at the end of your wrist on a cell phone. Most people don't stray into the woods, so these things don't become commonplace anymore. They just they see a YouTube video, oh, I want to try going camping. They go out, they do their thing, they have a great time. But there's a way to do it so that the people behind you can come out and have a good time as well, or a couple people can go out and kind of ruin it for everybody. And that's kind of the only point we're really trying to make here. At least that was my feelings on it. Ben, is it safe to say similar to you?
100%. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad about what you've done in the past or stuff. And I'm not. We've always encouraged people to get out there and enjoy it. Um, but I don't want to see people go out and they come back and they're all proud of what they did. They post it, and then next thing you know, they're getting tore up on the forums because they aren't following some of these basic courtesies, and it really can leave somebody with a bad taste in their mouth. The next thing you know, they won't ask questions, they won't do things because they just don't want to deal with the feedback. So if you think ahead and you take care of these basic principles, like I said, and the most basic thought is uh, treat other people in the woods with respect and give them the space if they want it, and leave no traces, in like leave everything in better shape than when you found it. Then I don't think you're going to have any problems. I don't think anyone's going to harass you or give you a hard time, or if they are, they're just looking to harass and give someone a hard time.
Yeah, and
And
there's
that
always some of those people out there. So
right. But for the most part, people that see a mess in a state in the woods, they are rightfully upset. I understand, because I've gone into sites and seen this mess, and I've been upset, and I've seen people with me get upset, and I've seen the work that we had to do to clean it up to make it fit for us to use, and then leave and know that if we come back in 2 or 3 weeks, the same type of people coming in doing the exact same thing. And it's what drives some of us further in the woods, having to create new campsites, because the good ones we should be able to use have basically been turned into trash cans. Uh, and we're just tired of really having to clean up after other people. Um,
the same kind of in my mind, the same kind of people that muddy up our campsites, not ours, but muddy up the campsites because they're not really anybody's. It's the same kind of lower life form that would ball something up like a the one around here is like fast food bag and drill it out their window when they're driving down the road. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I do stress lower life form because that takes some real lack of brain power to do stuff like that. In my
think how
mind, my opinion, and criticize me if you want, that's my firm belief.
think how clean the inside of their vehicle must be if they just can throw all their garbage out and never have to worry about it.
It is, and that's one of my big gripes, is especially throwing things out of a car, because you're going home to where there's a trash can, or at some point you're stopping at a gas station where, conveniently enough, they always leave a garbage can beside the gas pump. Like, it's not hard. Put it where it belongs. Same thing as when you're in the woods. The woods is not a garbage dump. Take it home. Put it where it belongs.
So since we talked with this, and this is probably going to be my cigarette butts. Um, they don't belong going out the window of your car, and they definitely don't belong in the woods. If you're going to smoke and you're going to have a cigarette butt, clean up your butts. Uh, you know, when I was in the military, that was one of the things you didn't leave. You weren't supposed to leave cigarette butts. If you absolutely had to discard one, I watched guys actually cut the cigarette, filter up and work it all into a fine dust and let it go, so it didn't stay in one spot, and they completely got rid of it. If you can't do that, if it's again, like it's like the beer cans and everything else. If you could carry it in, you can carry it out.
Yep,
Uh,
100%. And this is coming from a former smoker. I smoked for a few years, and I didn't leave cigarette butts in the woods. I'm still
uh,
guilty of enjoying the odd cigar, and I won't leave the nub in the woods. You know what I mean? So
and, and as for the window, I'm the same as you. I like motorcycles, and I've taken one to the throat a couple of times, and there's not much that upsets me much more than that.
oh, you're really harking on one of my pet peeves about stuff going out windows, man. Like it's one of the things I could rant on for hours. So I'm just gonna leave it alone. So Steve says, you guys doing next week? Pretty close to Christmas. Maybe last minute bushcraft stocking stuffer ideas. I'm game if you're game, Ben. We haven't missed an episode yet, minus Remembrance Day. We still uploaded a little tribute there. We just, we respectfully withdrew on that one. Not that we wouldn't have done it.
Mm.
But no, 23rd's fair game for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I do plan on being here. We will have something. We will probably talk about something, and we can definitely mention a few things that somebody could rush out and grab. Unfortunately, I believe our next show would be next
23rd.
Wednesday. So that's
You got one day.
yeah, you got one day, and honestly, like things won't even be open all day on Christmas Eve. It's going to be really busy. So if we give you any advice, it's things you're going to be able to go in and pick up quickly and easily.
It's going to be real. Actually, that might be fun, Ben. Let's do
Yeah.
real last minute stuff. Like literally emergency purchase. You got like 5 hours to go get this. That might actually be a fun topic, Steve. I hope you come back for that. This could be an amazing success or a complete disaster. But
I'm seeing jerky at the gas station here, buddy.
not a bad choice. Not a bad choice. Every bushcrafter that eats meat, at least, enjoys jerky because it keeps for that's next week. Let's not tip our hat too much. Yeah. It's going to be different kinds of jerky. I can see it. Teriyaki jerky. That's my second one.
Yeah. And we may have something else to talk about next week too. So
yeah. But anyway, we'll definitely be here on the 23rd. That's the bottom line of that. We'll still be here 8:30. So, do you have anything else you want to?
No, we've been over an hour. We've had a good conversation. There was some laughs, some giggles. I think some serious confrontation covered, and I would like to encourage people to get out there, enjoy themselves, but follow these common courtesies and rules, and I think you'll be fine. I think that I would be proud to camp with anyone who follows these basic rules.
No, and I have to say much the same. A little common sense goes a long way. And yeah, hopefully we see you out there sometime using a little bit of common sense and we can all have a good time. Hopefully you don't see me at the bottom of a waterfall.
Yeah, but if you see me sitting around a fire, I'm perfectly fine. You want to sit down and have a chat, I will chat with somebody in the woods for hours on end, and Robert will back me up on that one.
We had some good conversations huddled next to that fire. That's all I can say. It gets funny. It gets goofy. If you ever wanted to really find out what somebody's like, get them on a cold night stuck beside a fire because it's too cold to sleep. And you get to learn a lot about a person, don't you, Ben?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's all good.
It's all good. All right, everybody. We're going to leave you with that. Have a good night. Get out there, get dirty, be safe.
Night all.